I was on Instagram this morning and I was going through my Instagram stories. Those of you who are unfamiliar with that, that's basically like Instagram's version of Snapchat. And I came across this screenshot, and one of the people who I'm following, and I think they are from Chicago, where something stuck out to me when I looked at the title of the article from the screenshot. And I said, let me look this up and see if this is real, and if it is, if it's recent. And it is very real, and it is very recent because the article was posted on Tuesday, May 15th, 2 days ago, where it has stated that Chicago, based on rankings, has now been labeled the #1 most corrupt city in the U.S. And the state of Illinois as a whole is the third most corrupt state in America. I wonder what 1 and 2 are. I don't think they specify what 1 and 2 are. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, and I think it's pretty obvious, is because lamestream media loves to say that there's a whole bunch of black on black crime coming out of there, a lot of gang violence, this and the third. Every time the word Chicago come up, you'll always hear black on black crime, gang violence, or Obama. Those three words or scenarios will always come up in lamestream media or out of your typical white person's mouth. But it is not many black people in these positions where where the city of Chicago can get labeled as the most corrupt city in the U.S. and the state of Illinois as a whole is the third most corrupt state in the U.S. These positions are mostly held by white people, specifically white men, who are doing this shit. Now, I won't be surprised if they use a black scapegoat if, they have to, put a face to this thing. I mean, look at what happened with Kwame Kilpatrick. Now, granted, he was dumb, and he definitely has been held accountable for what he's done because he's still in jail for what he did, because he definitely aided in Detroit's decline a few years ago when all of that stuff went down. But they tried to make it seem like he was the only person that was involved. He was probably one of the only black people involved, which is probably why it was easy to single him out. Because every time they talked about the corruption going on in Detroit, they always brought up Kwame Kilpatrick's name. If you was to talk about that today, his name would probably be the first one to come up. You couldn't even name any other politician who was involved. His name will always come up. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try to do the same thing with this one. Now I'm going to go ahead and read this article that's coming from ABC7 Chicago. A report released Tuesday ranks Chicago as the most corrupt city in the country and Illinois as the third most corrupt state. What we find is a very dreary picture. In nearly every sector, whether you talk about aldermen, you talk about Chicago schools, you talk about contracts, in every area corruption is still rife in the city of Chicago, said Dick Simpson, lead author of The Continuing Corruption in Illinois, study in a University of Illinois Chicago political science professor. The study was released by UIC's Political Science Department. Simpson called former Chicago Public School CEO Barbara Byrd Bennett the corruption poster child for taking $2 million in bribes. He also cites the conviction of former U.S. House Speaker Dennis Hastert as in a sexual abuse scandal, Congressman Aaron Schock's indictment on fraud and theft charges, and the pending case against Chicago Alderman Willie Cochran for bribery and extortion. In addition, Chicago's red light camera scandal sent an assistant transportation department commission to prison for bribery and extortion. What that means is that it's harder to get businesses to come here because of its corrupt state. We're losing population, and corruption is one of the reasons we're losing population. We have undermined faith in government, Simpson said. Mayor Rahm Emanuel, during a school visit, cited a series of reforms he had enacted over the last 7 years to deal with the corruption. Now, he's one to talk about some corruption. He's one of the most corrupt people in this establishment. I will question the judgment about where we rank, but I'm going to leave that aside because that's not important. I don't know why he will question it. Basically, he's trying to save face, but he knows that he can't. What's important is, do you have the political will to make fundamental changes in the system? And while we're not resting on our laurels, I think when you look where I was on day one and where we are today, we made those series of changes. Governor Bruce Rauner has repeatedly railed against corruption since before he was elected. On Tuesday, his office cited several ethics reforms he has put in place through executive order, including a ban on legislators doing work before property tax appeal boards. Clearly, there is still work to be done, and we call on our partners in legislature to join us and to take a stand against public corruption to restore public trust. The UIC study points to things like the need for public financing of political campaigns and fair remapping of legislative districts as ways to reduce corruption. Now that's very interesting right there. But you already know, lamestream media will not touch this story. They just won't. Because then, that's going to force them to really look at themselves. Notice nowhere in the article they talk about so-called crime rates and everything like that. This is all coming from a very, very high source. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the link to this article down in the description because I want you to read that report. I would read it on here, but this report is 20 pages long and I don't have time to be reading 20 pages worth of words. And that one will go into more detail about what else they found. What I just read was just some of the stuff that happened. But this one's going to go into even more detail and probably reveal even more corruption that's going on in the state. But it's funny how Chicago landed as the most corrupt state in the U.S. and Illinois landed as the number 3 most corrupt state. But when they did those crime stats by cities, Chicago wasn't even in the top 50. How about that? So it sounds like to me, instead of them focusing on so-called black on black crime and gang violence in Chicago, they need to be worrying about these dirty politicians that they've elected into office. Or should I say paid their way into office, because a lot of them, of course, got payouts and that's how they got their position. Y'all let me know what you think down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you in the next one.